I'm going to start with introducing our moderator for this evening, David Kimo Frankel, who I think many folks know from his public interest litigation. He has done a number of cases to establish cutting edge legal precedent in the areas of protecting iwi kupuna, in the area of enforcing our public trust, access to public lands, and protections of water. And most notably, I think for folks who are active in this area, he was the lead attorney on the Ching v. Case decision, which established malama aina as an enforceable principle, but really set forth public trust duties with respect to management of lands. There's a lot of case law in the area of water, but Kimo really helped to cut the path on the enforcement of public trust duties with respect to land. So we're led by a very knowledgeable moderator tonight, and we're so happy that all of you can join us. I'm going to let Kimo introduce our other panelists here from the community tonight. Mahalo, Kimo.
Thank you, Lei. So yeah, today we're going to talk about the role played by boards and commissions. Looking at the list of folks who are attending, it seems like a bunch of you could be giving these talks. So a lot of you know a lot, but I'm gonna start off by giving folks a broad overview of the commissions we're going to talk about today, and then I'm going to turn it over to Jonathan Neal and Kaulu Lu to talk about specific boards and commissions. So, and I'm gonna give you a broad brush, but I'm hoping they're going to be more specific and correct any misimpressions I give folks. So we're going to talk about the Land Use Commission, the Board of Land and Natural Resources, the Commission on Water Resource Management, the Island Barrel Councils, and the Mauna Kea Stewardship and Oversight Authority. In the broadest of terms, the Land Use Commission deals with major projects. Land in the state is divided into 4 classifications: conservation, agriculture, rural, and urban. Almost half of the land in the state is in the conservation district. Almost half of the land in the state is in the agricultural district. Those are generalizations. Urban is a very small percentage. So major projects often have to go to the Land Use Commission to reclassify that land from, say, the agricultural district to the urban district. And that's when the Land Use Commission has to give its approval if it's a project greater than 15 acres. The Board of Land and Natural Resources deals with land in the conservation district, which is just one of those 4 classifications we talk about, and deals with other issues as well, including all the use of all state land. The Water Commission, and of course, there are going to be times when issues are going to overlap between the Land Use Commission and the Board of Land and Natural Resources. Same with the Board of Land and Natural Resources and the Water Commission. Technically, the Water Commission is dealing with freshwater issues, streams, groundwater. In some ways, their authority is limited, and in some instances, what they want to do overlaps with the Board of Land and Natural Resources does with water from state land. The barrel councils deal with barrels that have been previously identified before development project gets approved, and also the approval of managed barrel treatment plans. And in making their decisions, these boards and commissions need to fulfill what many of you know of, called the Kapa'akai standard, which deals with identifying and protecting cultural resources and practices. Public trust analysis, which considers things like alternatives. And Chapter 343, which requires the disclosure of environmental impacts of a project. So these boards and commissions are supposed to go through these analyses when making these decisions. And so today we're going to talk about the roles of these boards and commissions and their importance. So we're going to start by talking about what the Land Use Commission does, and maybe give some examples of decisions that show the importance of that role. And we'll start with Jonathan Scheuer, who served on the Land Use Commission for, what, 8 years or so, Jonathan? And he was chairman for many of those years. He runs environmental consulting practice, and I will turn it away to you, Jonathan, to talk more about the Land Use Commission.
Aloha mai kako. Thanks so much for having me, and it is truly an honor to be with the rest of these panelists and looking at the folks in the room, some real hammers out in the community too. But for folks who may not know more than the basic thing that Kimo shared about the Land Use Commission, so there's 9 members appointed by the governor, confirmed by the state senate, who act as a statewide planning and zoning body. So David or Kimo mentioned that there's 4 land use districts, and most land in the state is either in the agricultural or conservation district. If you want to do a large development, a new subdivision, a new resort, you're almost always going to be moving it from the agricultural or the conservation district into the urban district. It's called a district boundary amendment. And that's the biggest and most controversial things that the LUC tends to do. On Oahu, the most recent big controversial ones were for the development of Ho'opili between Kapolei and Waipahu, and Koa Ridge, which is between sort of Waikele and Mililani. It also includes very famous cases, and this gets to some specifics. If many folks have heard of the Kapa'akai analysis or the Kapa'akai decision, it was a decision in front of the Land Use Commission well before I was on it, where the landowner, Kamehameha Schools, and its development partner were trying to move land at Ka'upulehu on Hawaii Island from the conservation and ag district into the urban district. And the litigation over that gave rise to the affirmative duty for the Land Use Commission and other agencies to make specific findings about traditional and customary practices in an area. During the 8 years that I was on the commission, probably the biggest decision that was really important in my mind was when a developer for lands owned by Peter Martin in Oluwalu in West Maui, or Maui Komohana, which is, if you don't know the area, sort of partway between Malaya and Lahaina, proposed a 3,000 home development with a shopping center and a hotel. And the LUC both acted as the approver of the, or denier of, the environmental impact statement and its adequacy, and as well as it would be the ultimate approver whether or not to move this into the land use district. The community was really well organized, read the 2,000-page EIS from head to tail, and it was because of that testimony and the questions that the land use commissioners were able to ask that we ultimately rejected acceptance of the EIS, and the developer chose to not pursue development in that area. I think that was about 3 minutes. So if I have 30 seconds more, for special use permits, which are unusual uses in the agricultural district, the Land Use Commission is also the entity that approves those if they're larger than 15 acres after it goes through the County Planning Commission. This is going to be really important very, very soon on Oahu, as the City and County of Honolulu tries to get a new special use permit for the Waimanalo Gulch Sanitary Landfill, which I'm happy to talk about later is the wrong way to go about it. So I'll stop talking now.
Okay. Now, oftentimes there's confusion in terms. We just talked about the Land Use Commission. Now we're going to talk about the Board of Land and Natural Resources. Sometimes people refer to the Land Board, and people have no idea what you're referring to. So terms are a little bit important. And Kaulu Lu is going to talk about that. Kaulu is a cultural practitioner. She's a lawyer. She has worked with the courts and has been an inspiring advocate. And she's going to tell us a little bit about what the Board of Land and Natural Resources does.
Okay. Aloha mai kako, everyone. Just have to preface this by saying I do not have as much experience either appearing before any boards, and I don't have experience sitting on them, but I am a student of the people I'm sitting on the panel with, so very honored to be here tonight, and also with you folks audience who I know are very knowledgeable, but I'll try my best. So the Board of Land and Natural Resources, BLNR Land Board, right? It is a unique entity, in my opinion, just because it covers so much. So it's made up of a 7-member board that represent different islands, and then we have at-large members. But they do many things, including managing and administering, exercising control over, one, our public land trust lands, our water resources, ocean resources, our navigable streams, right, coastal areas, and then minerals, and pretty much everything that has to do with our natural resources. So it has a broad jurisdiction. And I think importantly, I mentioned the public land trust. They actually they have control over 1.3 million acres of our state lands, which a lot of it comes from our kingdom lands. And then our beaches and our coastal waters and coastlines. So yeah, big kuleana. And they have this board is also in charge of decision making for different divisions which sit under the DLNR, Department of Land and Natural Resources. Right? So those divisions include DAR, our aquatic resources, DOBAR for boating, ocean recreation, Bureau of Conveyances, conservation and coastal lands. So we have DOCARE, right, enforcement part, DOFA for the forestry and wildlife, and then our historic preservation, land division, and state parks, right? So they have large kuleana over managing all of these lands and resources. And then I guess to share an example, because they have so much kuleana, right? There are so many examples that everyone probably has one that the Board of Land and Natural Resources has been involved in, but I would say like one of the most famous ones during my lifetime has been TMT, right? And the board's decision to allow UH to obtain a lease in the conservation district to construct the 30-meter telescope, very controversial, and they still maintain that kuleana, even though it has gone through contested case hearings on multiple levels. And I guess, Chingvi case is another one, right, that Kimo has been a part of. So I think that was 3 minutes, but try my best. Yeah. And then it just has, just remember, it has a really broad kuleana over our aina and our ocean resources.
So, and just to emphasize, so the board both sometimes acts as a regulator and sometimes as a manager, and those may involve different laws and different roles. Okay, so let's now go to the Water Commission. Neil Hannes served on the Water Commission for 8 years and worked for Kamehameha Schools for decades. And I guess, I don't know if given that way, that's a good segue to the Mauna Kea Stewardship and Oversight Authority. You could talk about both or separate them, however you want to do it, Neil.
Yeah, thank you, Kimo. And thank you, Lena Ala and Charday to the Office of Hawaiian Affairs for organizing this. And yeah, the people who are showing up, 27 I see of you out there who have some interest in this really important topic. And it doesn't surprise me at all. My experience on the Water Commission for 8 years is that Hawaiians are showing up. They are at the table. And when issues come up that matter, I would say 75 to 90% of the people who testified before us were advocating on behalf of our cultural interests. So let me take these one at a time. I served 8 years on the Water Commission, and the day I got off, I then was put onto the Mauna Kea Authority, and both are extraordinary honors. Both are a lot of work, but really important kuleana, and I was very honored to take that on. I'll talk about it in terms of kind of the duties of the various boards, and then some of the specific tasks that we do to execute those duties. The Water Commission, you're really trying to ensure the prudent use and future availability of ground and surface water. It's as simple as that. As Kimo alluded to earlier, there's a lot of overlap with BLNR and so forth, but basically, when I was there, I tried to think of it as, our first task was to, number one, understand water is not held as an individual property right. It is in the public trust. We all have an interest in that, not an individual owner. And believe me, there are some people in this state who are stuck in plantation era thinking when they can do anything they want with water. There's some people who come in from abroad and come into our shores, and then this is not how we do it back where I come from. We could do all this stuff. And so they require an education, and you, as a water commissioner, you really got to be an advocate of that principle of that water is held in the public trust. Then we got to understand our resource, and it's really changing. You get the memo, man. Climate change is real, and the rain that we had, how the amount of rain we get, how it's retained, and how our system recharges, changing all the time. And we don't have enough information. So a really important duty of the commissioners, not themselves, but through the staff, is to really better understand the resource. And so that we can understand what's there, obtain and analyze that data, figure out what's going to be sustainable, have a sustainable yield, what we can use today, but assure that it's there to be used tomorrow, and develop some projections, and then you deliberate on permits with that in mind. And then you monitor compliance and trends and so forth and see if you've got to adapt and make changes. So that's very high level, kind of get on to the Mauna Kea Authority now. And man, we all
Neil,
yes.
Before you go to Mauna Kea, can you give an example of something the Water Commission did while you were there? Something that just sort of highlights a specific location.
Yeah, well, three of the big decisions were all on the island of Maui. I mean, we resolved what was it, 2-decade-old contested case for East Maui, a similarly aged contested case for Navai'eha, and then we're looking and we designated West Maui as a water management area. And each was fraught with a lot of issues. One of the important things, East Maui is 28 different streams, as I recall. And the character of each stream is a little bit different. So it becomes, you don't just say East Maui is like one thing, it's like many things, and it's a complex issue that you have to identify. And some of those streams have a lot of cultural activity or biological activity, and other streams, are pretty choked up and so forth. And so we're dealing with all of that, trying to understand the changing resource, trying to understand what was going on in the stream, and really advocating on behalf of the stream's interests and the culture users within that stream, as well as some of the recreational needs that we love a beautiful waterfall, or we love, to swim in certain ponds and so forth. And then trying to determine where could we do off-takes from the stream that wouldn't hurt that ecology, wouldn't hurt some of those cultural interests, and yet provide us some water for the changing agricultural scene of Hawaii. And there we said, if we're going to take it, we had to pack into the decision, how is it going to get there? What kind of losses are going to incur? We can't afford to lose any of this water. We have to have more efficient systems, and we were trying to advocate for that, which I think falls to a land board decision, as to how they store and how they've improved the infrastructure to transmit water across from source to field. And so there's a lot of issues there that we tackled in East Maui that were really complicated. And the biggest thing is we didn't get a perfect solution, but we said, this is stuck. When Kimo, you can explain a little better than I, that when you have a contested case, you're stuck with the facts that were in record. And when you have a long-standing suffering contested case, some of those facts may be 2 decades old. People will have died by then. The climate will have changed by then. The economy would have changed by then. And we were trying to figure out, how do we put a pin in that, get it to today, so we can look at what's really going on today. And it required us to kind of resolve that contested case. And then let's move forward from here, see what's going to go on, what Mahipona is going to really do, compared to what A and B was doing before them. And how do we try and meet those needs and the growing population needs, as well as the changing ecology. Okay, I think I've gone there, so I'm not sure if we have time for the Mauna Kea.
Yeah, go ahead.
Really important things happening on Mauna Kea. We all know the story of Kupuna getting arrested, who should never have been arrested. These are not criminals. These are people really trying to point to the system has a problem. It is broken. And how we manage this, and so that body that is called the Mauna Kea Stewardship and Oversight Authority. We didn't necessarily give it that name. There's a number of us who like to change things about that, but that's the name of the body. We are to protect Mauna Kea for future generations, while capitalizing on its unique attributes for contributing to developing a better understanding of the universe. So there's a specific caveat that we have in our creation that says, you know, we like astronomy in Hawaii. We have a policy in Hawaii to support astronomy. But as an aside, I think we do too much conflating of astronomy with observatories. There's a lot to astronomy. Our kupuna did astronomy without a single observatory. You can observe celestial activity, you can analyze it, you can develop theories, you can use it to guide your life without having an observatory, especially in a place like the summit of Mauna Kea. Nonetheless, you know, that's our big mandate. We are to stand up a new state agency to do it. They changed totally how, it's a very representative body. Look up the Mauna Kea Authority. We have to have lineal descendants, we have cultural descendants, people with astronomy background, people with land management background on Hawaii Island. That's all kind of packed into who gets to be on this 12-member body, with one member, Bonnie Irwin, not right now, is the Chancellor of Hilo, sitting as an ex officio non-voting member. But we are to come up with, create this new agency until we exist, until we take authority, have our authority kick in July 1, 2028. We are to co-manage with the University of Hawaii. Meantime, we have to develop a strategic framework that recognizes Mauna Kea's cultural and ecological significance, and then create a management plan that regulates all human activity, whether it's a tour, commercial tour, a recreational tour, astronomy, cultural activities, all of that. So that's what we're trying to set up right now, and doing a lot of community engagement in the process. Oh, that's a lot of time, Kimo. Thank you for allowing that.
No, that's great. That's great. Then, Jonathan, let's get back to you about the Island Burial Councils. Can you explain more specifically than I did in that brief overview in the beginning, what they do, and maybe an example of a situation where the Burial Council rendered a decision that folks may or may not be familiar with?
Sure, happy to, and actually would invite others on the panel who have knowledge as well to chime in. So the state burials law was passed in 1990 after significant controversy on the island of Maui, in Maui Komohana, specifically at Honokohua, where a hotel was being built right on some sand dunes against the advice of local kupuna, and archaeologists started to unearth at first a few and then dozens and ultimately hundreds of iwi kupuna. And there was no mechanism within state law that allowed for the state to jump in and stop it, or for any Native Hawaiian involvement in the disposition of those remains. So the state legislature passed the burial law, which creates burial councils. There's one for Hawaii Island, one for Maui, and one for Molokai Lanai, I believe, one for Oahu, and one for Kauai and Ni'ihau. Burials are split into two categories: inadvertent discoveries and known burials. And this doesn't have to do with, like, is it in a cemetery or not, but is it when a development is first proposed? Sometimes, but not always, the State Historic Preservation Division, or SHPD, will require that an archaeological inventory survey be done. If in the course of that survey they find a burial, that becomes referred to as a known burial. Burials accidentally discovered during the development are called inadvertent finds. And the burial councils have power over the ultimate disposition, which is primarily a decision between preservation in place or reinterment. For known burials, were consulted on, but don't have final authority on inadvertent remains. And I served for 3 years on the Oahu Island Burial Council as one of two Konomoku representatives. The burial councils are made up of two groups of folks. One are landowner representatives, and the others are representatives from of the Hawaiian community in different moku on the islands. And by law, the community representatives are supposed to be 2-to-1 or between 2-to-1 and 3-to-1 outnumber landowner representatives. During the time that I was on the burial council on Oahu, one of the largest controversies that emerged was over the disinterment of hundreds of remains at Kauai Ha'o Church, as they were planning to build a multi-purpose facility on the former site of Likeke Hall. And in that case, actually, the Oahu Island Burial Council asserted its jurisdiction, but the church, with the advice of their consultant and concurrence with the State Historic Preservation Division said, well, no, there's a Christian post-contact burial there as well, so the Oahu Island Burial Council has no jurisdiction over it. Ultimately, after well more than a decade and lots of litigation, this has resulted in the church not building its facility and finally moving towards reinterment of, I think the final count is almost 1,000 iwi kupuna.
So my understanding is that folks, iwi were reinterned last month or the month before. So, and then I guess I should say in full disclosure, I don't know if this needs to be disclosed, but disclose it anyway. Neither Jonathan nor I are Hawaiian, in case there's any confusion out there. All right, so let's move to the next part of this discussion, and we could talk about the composition of each, in terms of if folks know some sort of the history, the legal requirements, in terms of who needs to be on there, who cannot be on there, and maybe even the current dynamics that you've observed on these. So we'll go back to you, Jonathan, to talk about the Land Use Commission.
Sure. And here's my visual aid. Hopefully it shows up. Everybody has heard of this book. If you've never read it, Land and Power in Hawaii, it's now like a synonym of what really goes on behind the scenes. But the book by George Cooper and Gavin Dawes, both of whom passed away in the last couple of years, was really a book about the State Land Use Commission, about how the State Land Use Commission became the gatekeepers of development in post-statehood Hawaii and largely used their political ties. So there's the official version of what the statute says, which is the Land Use Commission is made up of 9 members. 4 of the members have to be from one each from the counties. The other 5 members are at large. So there has to always be at least one Hawaii County member, one Maui County member, one Kauai County member, and one City and County of Honolulu member, and then 5 others at large. And in an amendment to the law, one of the members of the Land Use Commission has to have expertise in traditional and customary Native Hawaiian practices. In reality, the Land Use Commission law should say, if it reflected how things have gone, there shall always be at least one developer's representative. There shall be always at least one member of a large construction union, if not more. And occasionally, there's a member of the Native Hawaiian community or environmental community that represents minority interests. And so for many, many years, the LUC was, as documented in that book, a rubber stamp for development. Over the years, over lots of litigation, the LUC started to be more and more one that started to understand it had a duty to protect important state interests and public trust resources that were going to be impacted in the course of development. During the time that I was on the Land Use Commission, which reflected the 8 years of appointments by David Ige, his philosophy was really to get a diversity of views. So he wanted robust discussions in front of the Land Use Commission. So we had, I know, I won't name who, like 2 members at least who voted for Donald Trump during the 2016 election. We had union interests, we had architects and developer interests. We also had folks representing Native Hawaiian community environmental interests. And we had really strong and robust discussions. The current governor, who is now named, I think, almost every member of the commission, it's almost exclusively union and real estate representatives on the commission right now. There is the required a member with expertise in traditional and customary practices, but otherwise, in recent years, it has switched to being a commission that their members have publicly blamed the existence of the Land Use Commission for the lack of affordable housing in Hawaii and suggested that doing away with the Land Use Commission is one of the best things that could happen.
Okay, thank you, Jonathan. Kaulu, Borderland and Natural Resources.
So the land board has a similar story to LUC, as Jonathan explained. Right, you have 7 board members, but historically it was composed mostly of men. And there's a good article done in 1994 analyzing the board members up until that year, where it was found mostly men and mostly Japanese. And then they also were a large amount of the interests were business community, real estate sector, as well as plantation executives. But then you do see that shift in the 80s. And then you see also more attorneys sitting on the land board. And then I guess basic requirements these days covered by HRS 171.4, that you have the 7 members and you have 4 island reps, right, the large counties, and then 3 at-large members. And then at least one of the members needs to have a background in conservation and natural resources, and that's through evidence through a college degree and field work and experience. And then another member must have experience in Native Hawaiian traditional and customary practices, and this can be through a college degree and work experience or through significant experience just as a cultural practitioner. So now, you have this board composition. Today, it has slightly more women on it, and then you see a little bit more representation from the environmental and conservation community than you would have seen in the past. And I'll also note that these days there has been a shift in demographics of members on the board. For ethnicity wise. And so you have 6 of the 7 members actually being Native Hawaiian, but that doesn't necessarily mean that these individuals in their capacity as board members represent what you would consider as intuitive interests for Native Hawaiians, such as environmental protection and conservation, or, looking out for traditional customary rights, because a good amount of them do still have interest or background in development and business community. So you have Dawn Chang right now, she still does chairperson, although there is an interim appointment. But her background is as an attorney, and she was a former attorney general representing, among other agencies, right, the land board while she was in AG. And then she also has a background in consulting for the development community. But the interim chair now is Ryan Kanakaole, who is also a former attorney general. He was representing DHHL in that capacity. And then you have Riley Smith, who represents the Hawaii Island. He has a background in engineering, but he is the president and CEO of Lanihau Properties, which is a development corporation. They develop commercial, industrial, and agricultural properties, and they also own Palani Ranch. So he has interest in Parker Ranch. In ranching. He's also a former Parker Ranch employee and has worked for other real estate corporations. But you have Jay Carpio, who is the Maui rep, who has an environmental and conservation background, was most recently appointed and began serving at the beginning of January. You have Karen Ono from Kauai, but she's a business community interest. She has been a longtime exec of the Kauai Board of Realtors. And then Kaiwi Yoon is one of the at-large members who he's a Bishop Museum executive, but also a background in community organizing. Denise Isera Matsubara, she's a Native Hawaiian, but has been in affordable housing development. And then Calvin Young, who is an attorney and has his practice areas include, business and development. So that's just a summary of the board currently now, but, and the history. So you can see, there's some shift in representation for environmental interests and Native Hawaiians, but still a large representation from the business and, I guess, development community.
Okay. Neil, what's the perspective on the Water Commission?
The Water Commission, they try to get people with some domestic water use background. There's a LOEA position that I served in with somebody with a cultural background. You found people with agricultural use backgrounds. You had a couple of large, and of course you have the head of DLNR sitting as our chair, as well as some representation from the Department of Health, because the quality of the water also matters, not just the quantity. But I really want to push that aside. I mean, those things are just to get people in the room who are with a broad set of skills. I think it's really important to emphasize that how we represent those interests or that background is really critical. If we go into those commissions and onto those boards and really advocate for the people who put us up, for service, then what you have are just a bunch of people yelling at each other on behalf of their particular constituency. At some point, you kind of have to take the hat off bring the representation of knowledge, but take the hat off of advocacy for a narrow group to really become a singular board or commission that's looking in a unified way at kind of the problem. In our case, the sustainable use of our freshwater resources. And so that's always the key and the challenge, that if we look at it, how do we tip the scale? And we've had governors and people just try so hard to stack these boards, and I think it doesn't serve their interests. And we found out that this governor found that out when he tried to put people to replace me who didn't have the requisite background and the support from the community, it comes back to haunt you, and it just stymies and slows down the important work of these boards and authorities. So you've got to hope. I think we're best served when we get people in there and they try and work as a team and really unite their experiences and background and knowledge into decision making and deliberation that really enriches the whole, rather than, okay, we've got the votes now we're going to swing this way for a while, then we swing the other way for a while. I mean, that perpetuates the issues that I think we've had. And I'll go now to the Mauna Kea Authority, which, as I said, it is that way in some ways because it's broadly representative. You have a Senate pick, you have a House pick, you have a governor's pick, you have the DLNR head, you have the ex officio membership of University of Hawaii Hilo, you have a board of regent rep, you have lineal descendant, cultural descendant, educator, land manager, so you got a bunch of slots. But I really commend this board and our leadership under John Kameji, who's tried to bring us together as one. That we recognize if we're supposed to advocate and get to a harmonious set of users, co-users, and coexistence on Mauna Kea, that we can't do so if we're all just advocating for our individual interests. We have to come together. And if we can't come together, the community's not going to come together. So we've invested a lot in the authority to kind of understand each other. And I tell you, a guy like Rich Masuda from Keka, who runs Keck Observatory, the guy's been amazing in terms of his embrace of kind of the cultural interests that we have, even though he doesn't know how it's going to turn out in terms of whether they get a long-term lease to continue having that observatory there. But he's embraced the process, he's embraced the ideology, and really joined our mission of trying to do the right thing for Mauna Kea and trying to accommodate as many of these other uses in an appropriate way as we can. So it's the attitude, I think, that I want to emphasize, and some of the skills. If you're a people person and you've got those kinds of skills that you can be convincing of others or embracing of others and help integrate ideas and build bridges, those are people, I think, who influence commissions and boards and authorities to really achieve the most on behalf of our mission and our people and our Aina.
Jonathan, do you want to add anything about the composition of the burial councils?
I think the only thing since I talked a little bit about how they were composed beforehand, I'll just say that it has been a challenge for a number of the burial councils to have quorum, to have enough appointees, and to be able to do their work. So it is, I don't want this to be misinterpreted. It is sometimes said by some to not be such a glorious appointment, right? It's like compared to like the supposed prestige on serving on the Board of Land Natural Resources or the Water Commission, Land Use Commission. The work they do is absolutely essential. It takes a huge amount of volunteer effort. And so what has happened, unfortunately, is that some of the burial councils haven't, there have been periods of times at least where some of the burial councils haven't met for many years. And that has not served the protection of iwi kupuna well. When the councils work well, which I was vice chair when Kumuhina was chair, developers really worked very hard, by and large, to talk early to the burial councils, talk about what their plans were, and to try and avoid any impact if possible. And that really sort of led to the highest levels of protection and the strong preference for preservation in place in almost every outcome. Not in everyone, but so it's a really important role.
So I'm going to deviate a little bit from the agenda, and I'm going to do a long wind up and ask you folks a question I didn't anticipate asking. But it seems to me that each board and commission has its own culture, its own sort of operating paradigm, way of doing things. And, I think there's a huge difference testifying before the burial councils versus the land use commission or the Board of Land Natural Resources. The burial councils are almost preordained to attempt to preserve burials, whereas the Board of Land and Natural Resources is almost preordained to approve every application that comes before it. Obviously, there are exceptions or whatever, but there seems to be a culture behind each one. And I think in part that may be affected by the staff that work with these boards and commissions. So I'd like to ask each of you sort of the relationship or role or interaction or anything you feel is appropriate to talk about the staff submittal that comes to you. So, and I guess I should take a step back. So before the board meets, an agenda is sent out, and generally the staff makes a recommendation, creates a staff submittal that goes to each agency recommending some sort of decision. And so I want to get your folks' impression of that. And so we'll start with you again, Jonathan. You have thoughts about that?
This was actually going to be my concluding remarks, so maybe I don't have to say anything after this. But so when I started early in my career as a policy advocate at the Office of Hawaiian Affairs, I appeared frequently in front of BLNR and the Water Commission, and I definitely had instances where I was sickeningly sure that the certain commission members I was testifying in front of had not actually even read the statute that they were supposed to be upholding. And so I really, at that early point in my career, my first conclusion was we just need better commissioners to do their work and vote the right way. And then I also served as a staff member to the Office of Hawaiian Affairs Board of Trustees and got a better growth and insight to it also really matters who the staff is, right? Are you putting good reports together? Are you giving them the best advice? Commissioners are volunteers. They rarely come in with a full breadth of expertise in the particular issues they're being asked. So they really have to rely on the staff members. And so then I said, okay, well, you need good commissioners and good staff. And then through an interesting and amusing series of circumstances, I ended up as a commissioner, first on the Oahu Island Burial Council, and then on the Land Use Commission. And one of the most interesting things I found was that if you were a commissioner and you really were concerned about something, and I was often concerned about water issues or Native Hawaiian rights, if there was nobody in the audience testifying in that particular issue on a particular agenda item, and I started to bring it up, my fellow commissioners who were great would kind of look at me askance and be like, so what's your agenda, right? And so I suddenly realized you also really need the really thoughtful, engaged community, because for whatever reason, it is so much easier as a commissioner to say, I'd like to highlight the testimony of community member Neil Hannes, who brought up these points, and I think we really need to pay attention to them. And so it's really this sort of diamond that we need. We need good commissioners. We need a really engaged public. We need excellent staff. And then actually at the staff level, having an executive staff member who leads that particular board or commission is really critical, because they can either really push things forward or really slow things down and not drive the agenda of that body. And so you need all four of those things to move together, in my experience, to start to get outcomes that both allow for economic projects that will increase collective prosperity, but also protect the very things that make Hawaii Hawaii.
Kahulu, your thoughts on staff interaction?
Okay, well, I can speak from personal experience on this one, because my family has had experience with our own issue, a special use permit under the natural area reserve. So our family is the only family that has a special use permit to fish in a ocean natural area reserve in Ahihikina'u, and it was through working with the staff from the early 90s. And so this area in Makan or Ahihikina'u became a natural area reserve before the Kapa'akai analysis was available. And so they did no survey or cultural inventory or cultural practices. They never paid attention to the traditional customary practices that were being perpetuated in this area. And so all of a sudden, this area became a natural area reserve. And then my family could no longer fish there, even though we had been fishing there for at least 5 generations. And so in the 90s, my grandpa and my dad when we were born, wanted to teach us how to fish in this area. And so we worked with the DLNR staff and NAR staff to get us a permit to fish in this area. And then, over time, we stopped fishing for a little bit. And so my brother wanted to do it. And all of a sudden, staff had changed, and staff's understanding and appreciation perhaps for traditional customary practices in this area changed. And so they've actually fought us tooth and nail, even though we had a full report that was put together by a Native Hawaiian Legal Corporation with the agency from the 90s. And so that really, we had to actually retain counsel from Native Hawaiian Legal Corporation because the staff could not understand our perspective and reasoning for why we wanted to fish in the natural area reserve for our TNC rights. So staff does matter. And then it took us a series, almost a year of negotiating with them on fish count numbers. And we lowered our counts from our original permit in the 90s. But it took us over a year just to get to a point where they would bring it to the Natural Area Reserve Commission, which would then make a recommendation to the BLNR for approval of our permit, because ultimately BLNR has approval authority. And so we had to work with the DOFA staff, to the NARS, and then from there, even with the NARS staff and the NARS commission. And then from there, we had to work with BLNR staff. And so eventually we got our permit approved, but it was a very frustrating process. And, if we hadn't retained counsel, even myself as an attorney would have given up, because I didn't have time to do all of that and work and engage with them and go back and forth negotiating numbers and counts. So it definitely matters. But I would also support what Jonathan said about a board chair, because how they run meetings matters too. I guess in my our work with community at the Water Commission, I don't want to speak for Uncle Neil, but just in our work with the community, sometimes when the chair is not, doesn't allow for community voices to be heard, in full, sometimes people come very with a passionate position. It's because they're directly impacted by these issues. And so, if you cut them off at 2 minutes, even though they have been dealing with 150 years of trauma, they don't feel like their position is shared. It really discourages them from actually, continuing to show up. And so even that, getting community engagement, it has, the board chair has a lot to do with that, encouraging and creating an environment where people's opinions and positions are heard. So staff and chair matter, commissioners matter too, because they also, I've seen them push the chair to allow more testimony than what the chair would probably like to, just out of respect, I guess, for colleagues. So there's that as well. I'll leave it at that.
Neil, your thoughts about interaction with the staff?
Well, since the only time I was ever I've ever gone viral in my life was defending a staff member of the Water Commission. I think you'd have to say that staff matters. It matters a lot, and I think the first thing is I would say is they need to really be dedicated to get this work done. If they're can kickers, people who kick the can down the road, or conflict avoiders, or hard issue avoiders, lazy like that, or just don't want to deal with it, they're terrible. I mean, it doesn't help us. We need to have somebody with some energy. Kaleo Manuel, when he first became our deputy for Water Commission, I met with him in his office and he had a whiteboard. And on the whiteboard he had a number. And I said, "What's that number for?" He says, "It's the number of commission meetings during my tenure that's coming up. Not that he's already had, but each one represents an opportunity to get something done. And if I don't get as much done as we can in these, whatever the number was, 28 or what have you, then it's a lost opportunity." And so he brought that kind of attitude. The second thing, and both he as well as, I got to tell you, Water Commission, we have one of the greatest hydrologists you can imagine. Aaron Strock is just amazing. And he's amazing because he's good on the technical part, but he's really good at working with community. And all members of the community, the development community, the landowner community, the Hawaiian community, so forth. He's just really, really good at reaching out and has credibility with them. So you can't address what's not agendized. So the slow walkers or the lazy guys, I mean, you gotta move past them, and they will kill the efforts of the greatest commission. But when you have people who will agendize things and put it on the agenda, and they bring it forth, that's really in a manner that's really well thought through and highly consulted, in terms of the community, it just makes the job of the commission a lot easier, and things get better. But I'll say, Kaulu, I mean, if people get discouraged because they get cut off after 2 minutes or 3 minutes, I didn't see it. They kept showing up, and they didn't, one after another. We had 12-hour hearings. We had all kinds of long hearings, and our community is really passionate about Hawaii, about our culture, about our people, about their children, and our future. I was just having a Mauna Kea meeting, and I saw Keani on earlier. I don't know if she's still on this call, but we were having a Mauna Kea meeting in the evening that was going to be 2 or 3 hours. The people had come from her hearing about Kalaupapa that was 7 hours at the county. 7 hours of that, and it wasn't necessarily smooth. It could probably some amount of contentiousness and so forth. They could have been exhausted or cynical, but they came to ours anyway. They showed up, and they participated, and they added a lot to it. And so this drive that we are seeing in the community to be engaged in the process is really intense, and I applaud it. And really was always so happy to see that engagement. Although not all the commissioners were. Some said this was a waste of time and it made it too long, and they didn't get it. They didn't get that we serve the people. And so that's I love seeing that engagement, and was really proud of it. In fact, that's what our people do. And so we got to stick with it, and we got to be vigilant, because it's life is a verb, man. Things are always changing all the time. You can't ever sit back and assume, okay, we're good now. You got to stay maka'ala.
All right, let's see if you folks can highlight a key decision or decisions you believe will be coming before the board or commission in the next several years that folks should be aware of. Jonathan, Land Use Commission.
Sure, I mentioned it already. So the City and County of Honolulu has applied to its planning commission for an expansion and extension deadline for the Waimanalo Gulch sanitary landfill, which is the dump, the landfill on Oahu. If you're not super familiar, the name of it is Waimanalo Gulch, but like many places in Hawaii, there's multiple names. This is the one that's above Ko'olina, west side of Oahu. And so this is like where if people walk away with one point from my remarks tonight, it's that I want you to not remember this next part, but remember about the details of special use permits. But remember that most governance in Hawaii is actually by board and commission. Like most of the important decisions, the things that we really fight about, the struggles where we have over what kind of Hawaii we will have, happens in front of these boards. So what's happening in front of the Land Use Commission is the City and County of Honolulu said that they kept looking for a new site and couldn't find anything. Now, I kind of have some question about that. They proposed a new landfill over Oahu's major aquifer. They proposed a landfill in place of the single largest soccer complex in the state. But in any case, they weren't able to do those. So now they're like, oh, shucks, we got to expand and keep the landfill on the west side. But most importantly, they're seeking a special use permit, which is for an unusual use in the agricultural district, which among the criteria is a temporary use. So when I was on the Land Use Commission and the city and county came in front of us for a further extension of Waimanalo Gulch, that's when we put a deadline on them. And we said, listen, it's not a temporary use. It's a permanent change of this land. You should go through the district boundary amendment process. And the reason why that's important is for the community who's been asking for real consideration of the impact of the environmental injustice that they faced on West Oahu for decades. The special use permit process is much more truncated, and you don't really get a chance, as you do during the district boundary amendment process, to have your concerns fully heard and specific mitigations made by the Land Use Commission to address those concerns. And so the former LUC, when I was on it, rejected the idea that you could just keep indefinitely issuing special use permits. And we said, we're putting a deadline on this one because it's supposed to be temporary. But if you want to, come anytime with a district boundary amendment. The City and County of Honolulu has sadly chosen to go for another special use permit, which is procedurally going to lock out the West Oahu from community from a real consideration of the ongoing environmental injustice impacts of the concentration of landfills and other damaging activities. So that's coming up this year and is going to be a real big one.
All right, Kaulu Lu, Borderland Natural Resources.
They deal with so much, so they have so many decisions that are coming up that are important. But
East
I'll highlight
East
two.
Maui.
Yeah. Hey, give me a chance. I was gonna say one of them being the East Maui water leases, right? Which they deferred decision on, and which will be coming to the board in May 2026 again. And that is on based on the land division's recommendation, right, to hold a contested case over allowing a water license for East Maui or Ko'olau Forest Reserve to go to public auction or be set aside for the county of Maui, right? And so, we have on here a member of the Ahawai Maui Hikina, the East Maui Water Authority, Jonathan. And so he might want to chime in on that. But they deferred decision making on it last year after hours of public testimony. So it will be coming back again, supposedly. We'll see. Anything to add on that, Jonathan?
Yeah, that was awesome. It's going to have momentous implications for all of Maui for decades to come.
Yeah. And then I would be remiss if I didn't mention also the EIS or final EIS for Pakulua, right? So the board voted last year to not accept, which is essentially rejecting it, which means that the Army had to go back and redo a part of the EIS process. And this is to renew leases at Pakulua, as well as other military leases that are up for renewal in the next couple of years that require board approval. So that is another big issue that will be coming before the board again when once the Army feels like, I think they have fulfilled and addressed the concerns that the board rejected the EIS on. Those are the two big ones.
So just to be clear on that, there's two separate issues legally. One is the acceptance of an EIS. The second is whether either a new lease is going to be granted or whether a land exchange of some sort is going to be approved. And those involve different legal criteria, and they unlikely would be made at the same meeting. But yeah, those will be coming up, maybe not this year, but at some point in the next few years. Okay.
Great. Thank you.
Neil, any water commission things coming up that we should be aware of?
I'm really going to focus on Mauna Kea, and I want to use this. I'll give Jonathan's really closer to the water commission issues, and Jonathan, you might want to chime in on that after I give a Mauna Kea example. My thoughts about the water commission, just for 2 cents, you're closer to it, is that probably some things happening in West Maui since we created that designation. And also, I think about West Hawaii, which you are very much involved in, and the Ota well issue and so forth. So I think my sense is that those are some of the hot button key issues on the commission's agenda, but you're probably closer to it than I am. Mauna Kea is just an amazing opportunity, I think, because written into the working group report that led to the law that created us, Act 255, were a reference to the kanawai from the Kumulipo. Ho'okiki kanawai, the law of flow and continuum. Kua'a, the burning back, that this in the process of this continuum, there's a gestative process that the earth goes through that we need to respect and allow. The Kaiokia kanawai, which suggests there should be boundaries, and Ki Hoi Hoi kanawai, which is about regeneration, not just of mankind, but of all species and so forth. We are creating an organizational kind of knowledge framework, an indigenous knowledge framework that will be an organizational framework for the strategy and the regulations that we put in place. It's kind of the first ever, as far as we know, in the state that's so culturally grounded. It will lead to decisions about whether we extend leases for observatories, what carrying capacity might be, whether somebody can just go up ski season or sunset and do any kind in any numbers, or maybe we'll have something more like Haiana and there will be some limitations and some education involved. So those are really important decisions that are going to be, we're in the process of discussing now, leading to a strategic framework and management plan, and that will be to prepare ourselves for implementation in July 1, 2028. So some big things and a really different approach to land use regulation.
Hey, Jonathan, do you want to chime in anything about the water?
Yeah, sure. And one of these Kaulu can talk about as well. So since the designation of Maui Komohana as a surface and groundwater management area, there's over 100 water use permit applications that are critical, ranging from people seeking to restore mokuhinia and restore makai flow in certain streams for kalo cultivation and other practices, as well as water use applications by the County of Maui for their Department of Water Supply system, private water purveyors, and other developers. None of these have been dealt with, and the Commission will have to start engaging with all of those. In addition, DHHL has a long pending reservation request for surface water from East Maui, which has not been dealt with. There is the Honolulu Board of Water Supply has a pending petition in front of the Commission to designate Waianae as a groundwater management area, the only area of Oahu that doesn't have that extra layer of management, which is odd because it's the driest and most Hawaiian part of the island. On Keaho, the Keaho Aquifer continues to be a site of significant controversy. There's things that have been off and on coming up in West Kauai and on Molokai as well. So the Commission on Water Resources Management has a more than full agenda, a list of things that they need to be dealing with ahead of it. And the biggest challenge is how are they going to, as Kaleo Manuel did, take each one of those meetings as a critical path towards taking up that work.
Great. So we're going to give you folks time if you have questions to type them in the chat. Hopefully we can get them and answer them. And you can type them while I blather away here, and you can just ignore what I'm about to say. But there are a number of issues that are coming up at the legislature this year, including the Senate will be considering the approval or rejection of folks that the governor is nominating to these various boards and commissions. Some will, a few may be controversial. The Office of Hawaiian Affairs has a number of bills that affect the composition and operation of a number of the boards and commissions, and I'm hoping that somebody will put that information in the chat for you so that because if I rattle off a bunch of bill numbers, it's just going to go in one ear, not the other. So you can look in the chat for information about these bills. If you are interested in serving on a board and commission, it's not the easiest thing to have happen. I mean, to be blunt about it, the folks who get appointed have some sort of political connection. Somebody knows somebody who knows somebody who is willing to vouch for you indirectly to the governor. That's what it ultimately comes down to. The Office of Hawaiian Affairs sometimes can play a role depending on the relationship between the office and the governor's office. So those are in the shortest, simplest way of saying that that's how folks get nominated. But clearly, who gets appointed is very important to our future, and it's certainly been important to our past. So I'll see if I can. The information about OHA's legislative package has been posted in the chat. Anyone out there have any questions? Give you a minute or so. If not, we'll let you get on to your dinner.
I will fill in 30 seconds of that minute to highlight, even though it is not necessarily a statewide significance, the BLNR will also be dealing in the next few months with the end of the 10-year tri-wait period at Ka'upulehu, where their fisheries were given a 10-year rest, and the community, through its Ka'upalehu Marine Life Advisory Committee, has come up with draft fishing regulations. At the end of February, the board will consider going out for approval to have public hearing on administrative rules on that, and ideally we'll be making a vote on that after that public hearing before July 1.
Great. And there's isn't there some legislation that's relevant to that as well?
There's various important pieces of legislation working its way through. One that occurred to me that ties into this conversation we've had is a bill known as the Free the Water Commission bill, which would administratively make it more like the Land Use Commission. And specifically, the head of DLNR and BLNR would no longer be the chair of the Water Commission, but the chair would be elected from its members, like the Land Use Commission is. And the deputy director of the Water Commission, who is currently a gubernatorial and Water Commission chair appointee, would instead be hired by the Water Commission itself, as is the executive director for the Land Use Commission. It also proposes a whole bunch of other changes to the law. Kaulu's very well versed in those and could talk to them, but it's a way to try and improve the operations of the commission.
Great. Thanks, Jonathan, for mentioning that. I'll just add that, because I do see some questions in the chat, but just really quickly add that it actually, I guess it improves the administration of the Water Commission, but it actually goes to the original intent when the Water Commission was first formed. You know, they have a lot of initial documents in the early years that say that the Water Commission needs to be independent of the board for political reasons, because, you know, administration of water had become so political, especially in that transition, the plantation transition era. So it really is just going back to the intent of that and looking at what the initial legislators had intended when the water code was passed. So I think we can move to questions, though.
Before we do, let me just put a postscript on that, Kaulu. Thank you for raising that. As a commissioner, one of the reasons this came up, and it came up part of the Kaleo Manuel situation and so forth, when we felt we didn't have the independence that we deserve, to really just make the decision to keep him on, which is what we wanted. But the thought of put aside a situation like that where there's some conflict. Governors have to stand for re-election, and every 4 years they need to kind of produce something for the good of their electorate so they can get re-elected. That short-term horizon doesn't always work to the benefit of something that has a long-term interest. You know, that's meant to be perpetual. And so we felt like we needed the authority and the position within government to some insulation from that short-term political pressure to do the right thing for the resource and for future generations. And so it doesn't speak ill of it, because a good politician might want to do a lot for constituents today, but those things that they do may put too much pressure on the resources. Somebody's got to be in a position to protect that for that future. Thank you.
So let's deal with some of the questions. I'm going to deal with the last one first. The whole idea that it's not who you know, but what you know. And I think that is the ideal that a lot of us would like to see. But I think the reality is, I mean, think about if you're having a party, you invite your friends. And if your friend says, hey, can I bring so-and-so? You say, yeah, bring them, because they're the friend of your friend. You don't generally, maybe some of us do, but generally most people don't invite random strangers off. And the reality is governors are going to appoint people that somebody who they trust recommends or refers to them. I'm not saying that's right, but that is the way the world works, or our current world works, and that's what we have to. Those are the rules of the game we're playing, and that's just so that just sort of. But the more you are involved, the more if you testify, the more well known you become, the more likely it is that somebody at some point is going to be willing to vouch for you. Neil, can you answer this question about
Well,
the?
let me just
Go ahead.
respond to that, though. I mean, but look at the power that the people exerted in really calling out the governor on my successors on the Water Commission. The people who obviously did not either meet the background test or had some inherent conflicts that, more he kept plowing, kept trying to do it, and so forth. But the people were really persistent in exercising their voice, and I think ultimately that influenced the outcome and led to kind of a different selection. Now, it's still in the governor's hands and so forth, but I think we just can't be silent, and I think we have to give encouragement as well as give acknowledgement to the power that's exerted on the process over these years.
So, I mean, that sort of highlights what Jonathan was saying. I don't think it was a three-legged stool. It's like a four-legged table. You have to have good folks appointed. You have to have good staff. You have to have public involvement. I can't remember what your fourth thing was, Jonathan. That was so memorable.
You need good staff leadership, good commissioners, and good community involvement.
Yeah.
I do. I mean, I want to recognize and having many times appeared in front of boards and commissions where some of the commissioners just were clearly not qualified. Yeah, you're right. It's it is heva that we have people serving in these positions of immense responsibility who either aren't qualified or who actively believe that their boards and commissions should be done away with. That said, some of the kuleana does fall on us to be ready to serve when those positions open up. And so there's been work by DHHL working with Kahūlāwai to do water rights training for people. That was a direct response in a conversation on Hawaii Island when a proposed charter amendment was made to require that one of the 9 members of the County Board of Water Supply be also a homesteader. And the amendment died. Uncle Pat Kahālāwai said, well, okay, even if it died, what's stopping us from being ready to get appointed? And so that led to this ask to DHL to do these water rights trainings on how to be on board in water commissions, which has actually led across the Pai'aina to a number of the people who've gone through that to be serving on not just people who've gone through the training, not just through on the county boards, but also there's a member of the Water Commission who went through the training as well. I'm not saying they got on the commission because of that training, but it's part of this pathway as we move towards greater governance of our resources that we also have to pursue. Living in the junk system that we do where who can be determinative.
Who you have anything to add? No? Okay. All right.
But Kaulu wants to answer one of the questions there. I see it in the chat.
Yeah, really quickly, if I can. It was on the Rights of Nature bill, and I think it's in a conversation that we should be having. But so on its face, I think the Rights of Nature bill seems very appealing and can be seen as a panacea because of how it's been deployed in places like Aotearoa. But actually in Hawaii, I don't think it's appropriate to have a rights of nature doctrine because we have the public trust doctrine, which is actually stronger. And it's grounded in our own traditions and customs of the people here in Hawaii. And to a certain extent, the rights of natures and those principles could conflict with the public trust doctrine. And we have the public trust doctrine really provides a strong foundation for us to manage our resources. And so I think we should just really be working towards realizing and the full potential of the public trust doctrine rather than introducing new principles that don't have the foundation in Hawaii. That's all I have to add. Thank you.
Can someone describe more about the astronomy background requirements for Mauna Kea?
We have one position. It's held by Rich Masuda, who's on the authority, who has to have an astronomy background. And Rich has that, and he represents both the industry well, and he engages with the authority extremely well. He's our second vice chair, and he does a wonderful job. And I will say the heads of astronomy here who dedicated themselves to be a part of the process they've been coming around, and a number of them have told me, it says our problem is not understanding, the people of Hawaii and Hawaiian culture. It's explaining that to a board that may be international, and funding sources that maybe, have a really different view of, whatever, and ultimately, this is kind of getting near the end here. I think one of the key things, issues we have there, is a lot of these boards and commission, uh, because of the fractured nature of our past and all the abuses and injustices of the past, whether it's to the Aino or to people, really aren't trusted. And that affects who goes on to the boards, and sometimes it's perpetuated in how we appoint people to boards and commissions. And one of the things we have to do is to take the time and bring on the talent that's capable of rebuilding trust in our community around different issues. Uh, that's what we, people, every time somebody wants to push TMT forward again, I look at them and say, you're going to get the same result. I don't know what you're thinking that leads you to believe that people won't be just as agitated and put themselves on the line as they did before. You've got to build some trust with people and understand what caused them to resist this before. And if we don't fix that and address those issues, we're still going to be there. But people want to move at the speed of transaction. They want to move at the speed of some arbitrary budget. They want to move at the speed of, quarterly earning report or whatever the heck it is. And when that supersedes trust, you get nothing. You get a negative, result. If we can kind of rebuild that trust, and these are the boards and authorities that really are in a position to kind of, govern the process and restore process, make things transparent, make things logical, be consistent in how you enforce. Then you start to see trust restored in our community. Can't please everybody, but we can be logical about what we do and transparent about it.
I'll wrap up here and thank the panelists and just to answer a couple questions that are out there. Boards and commissions are not always going to operate perfectly, and if there is an issue, you should. This is my bias here. You should reach one of those attorneys out there with either Earth Justice or Native Hawaiian Legal Corporation, who can do a good job of analyzing whether there is a legal claim there and moving forward with making sure the law is properly applied. But thank you all. I hope this gave you good orientation to the boards and commissions that are out there, what they do and their importance. And thank you very much.
Mahalo.
Mahalo, aloha.
Mahalo, everyone. Aloha.